Dr. A. Pedro Meurs, President of Meurs Corporation.
Yes.
You're an expert on world fiscal systems for oil and gas. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for making time for this interview.
Great pleasure to be here.
In Singapore, that is. Yeah. Tell us a bit about your work for CWC Energy. First of all, what exactly do you teach in classes like these?
Now, the CWC has a School of Energy that has now become very famous, and we started it about 10 years ago, and I have actually been involved right from the beginning, and that has always been a very good relationship. And the goal is to teach very specific subjects to professionals around the world on high-level subjects that deals with the oil and gas industry. And there's a wide variety of courses, as you may have seen: fiscal systems, LNG contracts, legal courses, and so on. My specialty is on the fiscal side, and consequently, over the last 10 years, I have given every year courses for CWC. It started with one course in London every year. Now we are up to 3 courses a year, one in London, one in Singapore, one in Dubai. And it is always very well attended, 30 people from all over the world. We put a maximum because it is difficult. It is a computer interactive course, so it's always very well attended, and I enjoy it very much. It is a great aspect of my work. Otherwise, of course, I do consulting work around the world. That is my more normal activity.
What is your background that has made you an expert in this area of the oil and gas industry?
No, I graduated in the Netherlands with a PhD in geology, but I also did economics in Rotterdam. So already early in my life, I started to combine geology and economics, and that turned out to be a combination that was happy for me for the rest of my career. And so I started to specialize on the fiscal side of oil and gas, and I started my consulting business in 1974, and I've been doing it ever since.
Just fiscal aspects?
Just the fiscal aspects of oil and gas, and I've done that in almost 70 countries in the world now. So I've worked in 70 countries all over the world on that particular topic.
Oil prices are at record highs. We had $102 a barrel for WTI just the other day. Now, against this background, all the countries which possess the oil and gas reserves are looking at getting more for their resources. And we've seen an outbreak of resource nationalism in several countries over the last 3 to 5 years. Why now, particularly? And how far do you think this resource nationalism outbreak will push the boundaries?
Now, to begin with, of course, with the much higher oil prices, the value of oil and gas properties around the world has increased very significantly. Of course, there has also been increases in cost, but nevertheless, the value of the properties have increased significantly. As a result, governments are charging more royalties, taxes, and so on to the oil industry in order to make sure that the host nations benefit from the development. I wouldn't call it resource nationalism. If you go back to Adam Smith in the 17th century, he already wrote it as an integral part of our capitalist society that an owner of the resource is entitled to a fair share of the economic rent of that resource. And all governments are trying to do around the world. It doesn't matter whether it is the United States which increased taxes, or Alaska which increased taxes, or Britain which increased taxes, or Alberta. All what governments are trying to do is get their fair share from the resources. So I wouldn't consider the United States a government of resource nationalism. No, all they're trying to do is get a fair share of their resource wealth for the nation, as it is supposed to be from an economic point of view.
Yeah. Would this imply then that in the past, prior to this run-up in oil prices, the governments of countries weren't getting a fair share? Were the oil companies then getting a steal for the assets?
Not necessarily. With the lower oil prices, of course, a basic principle is that companies will not invest unless they see a fair and reasonable rate of return for their shareholders. Now, with lower oil prices, the taxes and the royalties have to be lower, or the production sharing has to be lower, in order to accommodate a reasonable investment profitability. So consequently, what you typically see is if oil prices increase, the tax share goes up. Of course, profitability of the investors is maintained. If prices decline, you will see this government take, as it is called, declining. For instance, between 1986 and 2004, we had a clear period where governments took less and less and less because oil prices were declining, and to maintain profitability of the operations for the investors, you simply had to take less royalties and taxes. So change is always taking place in world fiscal systems, and the change is very much linked to oil prices.
Would you like to comment on the current case going on between Russia and Venezuela and ExxonMobil?
No, Venezuela has aggressively increased their government take on the oil sands, the heavy oils in Venezuela. They did that in 3 different ways. They increased the royalties, they increased the taxes, and then they increased what they called their state participation on the heavy oils. Venezuela was prepared to pay for their higher stake. So in principle, Venezuela paid for the increased share that they acquired, say, in the heavy oil projects. However, in some cases, some oil companies felt that apparently the payment was sufficient and they agreed with Venezuela on the deal. Other oil companies like ExxonMobil felt that the payment was too low, and consequently they are, of course, currently in a dispute. Of course, arbitration will then determine who is right in this particular case, and consequently it will probably take a while until this is sorted out.
Are you consulting for either party?
No, my specialty is consulting for governments, because the problem is if you start to consult for both parties, very quickly you get a conflict of interest.
For the Venezuelan government?
I haven't consulted for the Venezuelan government, but I've done quite a bit of training courses in Venezuela, and I know Venezuela very well. But I've done a lot of work in other Latin American countries.